So I hope people are enjoying themselves and have learned. I've learned a lot since the presentation started. How's this work? Thank you. So the title of my talk is from 1960 onwards. You've heard a huge amount about everything that happened earlier. I was in particular interested in Jim Clinch's description of the, I'd call it, relative disorganization of the competition in the 1950s. Things certainly improved hugely, and I've used this word "and upwards" because the competition, I'm not infrequently asked, the Hospitals Cup, does that still happen? And I want everyone here to be under no illusion. The Hospitals Cup very definitely happens, and in my opinion, is probably a better competition now than it used to be. I show this photograph here, and a remarkable feature of Hospitals Cup rugby in the 1960s, and in fact it extended for 20, 30 years, was the amount of coverage that the competition was given in the national newspapers, and not just the Irish Times, but also in all the major Irish newspapers. On occasion, the front page of the Irish Times would be used to show an event that happened during a Hospitals Cup match. Anyone like to identify? Gary and Frank. So that's Frank McGrath, whose son was playing for Ireland today in Japan. And Gary, thank you very much for that. Now I showed this photograph because not all photographs were in the front page. Some of them were, I won't say buried, but they were in the sports pages. One of the things I learned from going through old copies of newspapers were how thin the Irish Times was. In fact, the sports page was the second and third page a lot of the time. And Hospitals Rugby was often described, and photographs of players and instances and so on. I wanted to show this is the pointer, yeah. This individual here, he was an esteemed future president of the college. In fact, he's been talking at this meeting already, so he's probably instantly recognizable. It shows his ball carrying skills as he reaches for the line in a matter. Pardon me? Pardon, Joe? You were looking on. I was looking on. Well, I mean, I was probably about to bow because. So the competition certainly had a prominence that in a way maybe is surprising, and I think a background to rugby as it occurred in Leinster at the time helps to explain this. There was really relatively little competitive rugby in Leinster in the early part of the season, and so first teams played one another and played maybe visiting sides in what were called friendlies, and otherwise there was no really serious competition. And so there was no first-team league, for example. And so the major games were interprovincial games, which were supported not particularly heavily. And there was great interest in trial games because the organisation of how you became an international very much depended on managing to get into the final trial. If you played well in the final trial, then you might be selected for Ireland. And a lot of the press, in fact, was devoted to speculation about who might get onto the final trial teams and whether you were on the possibles or the probables. So the rugby attending public, in a way, were short of, if you like, good competition. So one game that was played regularly in Lansdowne Road was the colours match between UCD and Trinity. And the very fact that Hospitals Cup games took place could whet the appetite of the rugby attending public. And they supported these games, especially the final, as we'll see in a minute. So in addition, the fact that many university players were also playing for the hospital teams also made a significant contribution to the games. So I've put here a few of the quotations. We've already had several quotations from earlier years, but here's a quotation from the 1962 final that it justified its star billing played before a large crowd. So this game was significant in those days. It continues to be significant. Another comment here, the exchanges were pretty fierce, and they often are, they still are, with two packs tearing into each other with single-minded enthusiasm. And here's another quotation from the 1963 final. The teams were accorded a standing ovation for their efforts, and they described the game as a sparkling game. And one of the people who was principally responsible, if you like, for this was this man here, Paul McWeeny, who was the chief sports editor of the Irish Times at the time. And Paul McWeeny was a great Hospitals Cup enthusiast and always gave sufficient space to Hospitals Cup games. Okay, so one of the reasons why there was an interest in the Hospitals Cup was because high-profile players were often involved. And we've heard from the two earlier talks about the high-profile players that who played in the competition in earlier years. So many of these players were internationals, several interprovincial players, lots of people who played on the UCD and on Trinity Colours team. And something that lent, if you like, a little bit of, I was going to say venom, but that's the wrong word, vigour, was the fact that you might have someone on a hospitals team who was a clubmate normally, and now they were adversaries. And usually this stimulated the behaviour of the players. Okay, so just to give you an example of how common a rugby player might be on the Hospitals Cup team, this is the winning Mater side in 1964. And it shows that three internationals, Al Baroni, Aidan Brady, and Barry Bresnan, all members of that side. Mind you, they played the following year almost with the same team and they were defeated, but we won't go into that because it might be. So if we look at the number of internationals at the time, I've listed some of them here. We've heard about Bill Mulcahy. I've mentioned already Aidan Brady, Frankie Byrne, John Murray, who is the son of I've forgotten his first name, Paul Murray, who was a star in earlier years, and Jerry Tormey, another classic out-half for UCD. And then in the 1970s, Frank O'Driscoll, myself and my brother Tom, and Dickie Cook all played international rugby. And so here I felt that at this stage we should have a quiz, and the quiz is, and it shouldn't be too hard. So some of you will remember that when you went to an international, players were known by their initials. There wasn't any, the informality of calling someone Billy this or whatever. It was always initials. So the quiz is, Mulcahy initials? WA. In fact, you had a prompt there because we had a learned. Now this is going to be the difficult one, and I was given a bottle of wine today, but you're not. Anyhow, the Moroni initial, anyone know? TA, correct. And then the most difficult one of all is Barry Bresnan. Say it again? FPK, exactly. So it wasn't only in that era, in those decades, but when we move on forward, we see lots of other international players playing in the Hospitals Cup competition. So we've got Niall Hogan, Paddy Johns, Fergus Dunlea, and in the 2000s, Emmett Byrne and Mihai Virano, all internationals. I put in Felipe Contamomi just mischievously because on a particular year, Beaumont Hospital listed him as a member of their substitutes. He never actually made it onto I think it's very unlikely, probably, that they needed his presence, judging on the success of the Beaumont side at that time. Okay, so just to show you some images, Paddy John, many people here will remember Paddy John played for the Dental in 1992, played for the Feds in 2002, but more importantly, he was a captain of the Irish team on several occasions, played for Ireland, and also was a Lions tourist. Niall Hogan, who is here, played scrum half for Ireland for 2 or 3 seasons, played for Beaumont in 1989 and 90 and won on those two occasions. He also was a captain of the Ireland side. And this is a photograph of Emmett Byrne. Emmett Byrne went the other way. Emmett Byrne was a professional rugby player who, when he had finished his rugby career, decided to study medicine and studied his medicine in RCSI and played for the Beaumont team on two successful sides. So I want to talk a little bit about Barry Bresnan, FBK. When Barry was given these initials, I remember in UCD, there was a slight sort of almost jokey thing of calling Barry, who we all knew as Barry, FPK. So it was a humorous, if you like, set of initials for Barry. He had a remarkable career. He played centre for Ireland. He got his first cap in 1966. He became a Lions tourist that same year. He was called on to play with the Lions in New Zealand, and then was chosen again to play in 1968 as part of the Lions team, played in all 3 test matches. However, getting back to Hospitals Cup, Barry played for 6 campaigns for the Mater Hospital between 1963 and 69, winning the competition on 3 occasions. Remarkably, when he came back from the Lions tour in 1968, he put on the togs and togged out for the Mater Hospital. And I think that's, if you like, it's a mark of the type of individual that Barry was. Okay, so I've gone on a little bit about the amount of media coverage, but just a few quotations here, and the emphasis here is Paul McWeeny always wanted to say that it wasn't only the stars, it was the other players, and we all agree with that. So here are a couple of the comments that he makes. He talks, it was a most entertaining game, but by no means dominated by the senior club players. And the second quotation, never can there have been a better final, but complemented in particular by junior players. So Paul McWeeny was always keen to recognise their contribution. Okay, so not only did we have international rugby players, we also had international referees. And I've listed them here. There are 5 in total. Kevin Kelleher, John West, who is here, and I'm delighted to see John here. John refereed the final on no less than 10 occasions over a 20-year period, whereas Dick Beamish, Owen Doyle, and Gordon Block carried out this function less frequently. Here's a photograph of John. He doesn't look that much different now. And John was a very famous international rugby referee, but refereed the final, as I say, on no less than 10 occasions between 1973 and 1992. The other referee who was well known in the Isles of Ireland and Great Britain was Kevin Kelleher. Kevin Kelleher, many of you will remember, played a huge role in Leinster schools rugby in particular, but was, as I say, also a well-established rugby international. He refereed the final just on 1 occasion. He's best known for sending off probably the most famous rugby player in the world at that time. And that player's name was? Colin Meads. Colin Meads was a All Black, and as I say, he probably was the most famous, best held in high regard player. But anyhow, something that Colin Meads did was sufficient for Kevin Kelleher to send him to the sideline permanently. This wasn't the yellow card era, this was red card era. And obviously, Kevin Kelleher became notorious for having the gumption to do this. Okay, so to go back to the competition a little bit, over the years, the 60 years that I'm covering, there's no doubt that 3 sides, 3 hospitals dominated the competition most of the time, Mater, Vincent's and Beaumont, when Beaumont became established. But that's not to say, and I will be talking a little bit about this, that the dental and the team that we call the Feds also achieved notable victories in the competition. So if we talk about the 1960s alone, the UCD hospitals dominated. there were a huge number of medical students in UCD Rugby Club, and it was one of the golden eras, really, of Leinster Rugby at the time, the UCD Rugby Club team. And so this allowed Vincent's to win on 6 occasions, Mater on 3 occasions. And there's an interesting piece of information here that Bagot Street, you remember that the Trinity Hospitals had dominated the competition, certainly in the early years. And Bagot Street, who had never won the Hospitals Cup, got to the final in 1966. The final was a draw. The draw was achieved by a penalty from Dickie Cook in the last minute of the game. This was often the way these games were sorted. Anyhow, in the replay, Bagot Street failed to win, and this was another victory for St. Vincent's. Okay, this is the 1965 Vincent's winning side. There are various players here that you'll recognise, including Joe McKenna, who introduced the meeting today, and various others. This is Dickie Cook, who played international rugby later for USA. So there are many, many fine players on this team. Mitchell Cogley described this game as thrilling a game as one could wish to see. So high praise. And here is another side that played for Vincent's later in the 1960s. I've named Frank O'Driscoll. Frank O'Driscoll played the following year, played for Ireland in a tour of Argentina. Next to him is a very well-established player in his time, Mick Smith, a very skillful out-half who played out-half for UCD and also Leinster. And various other players here, including 2 notable prop forwards, Tony McDougall and Paul McCarthy. But there are many other players that I could point out. I'll point out one last one because he's here and I'm pleased, is Peter Boylan. You don't need to give a round of applause. Okay, so that was the 1960s. So then as we move forward into the 1970s, the rugby landscape started to change. So I spoke about the absence of any, if you like, proper competitive rugby between the local Leinster sides. And then it would appear with reluctance almost, certainly with regard to some clubs, a Leinster Senior League was established in 1971. And eventually this became an All-Ireland League, and the media attention, the media interest in Hospitals games waned a certain amount, but certainly it remained for a decade or two. And of course, this was the beginning of a gradual move towards the professional game. So the other big event that happened at this time, or started at this time, was an amalgamation of the smaller hospitals. Both Morgan and Michael showed you all the name of all the very tiny, if you like, Trinity hospitals. The correct decision was made to close those down, and they joined initially in what was called the Federation of Dublin Voluntary Hospitals, and hence the name the Feds, which I will be coming back to here and there. And eventually, these hospitals either joined St. James's Hospital and Tala Hospital. Another event that was changing things was the dental school, which consisted of UCD and Trinity students at this stage. It was a dogma that this would stop and that only Trinity students could attend and study dentistry in the dental hospital. And another very important event at this stage was an amalgamation, first of all, between the teams of the RCSI Associated Hospitals, Jervis Street and Richmond. And eventually, these hospitals moved to Beaumont Hospital that we've heard of already. However, the dental hospital were going to make their mark before any of these things happened. So in 1971, the dental hospital won the competition. And Greg Smith, whose name is misspelled here, I learned this morning, Greg has a Y, that's important, scored a try early in the game and ended up in the defeat of Vincent's, who'd won the competition several years in a row at that stage. And then Dental went on and won the competition 2 years later, beating Richmond Jervis Street. And the captain of this team was Declan Malloy, who's here with us. And Declan was another highly skilled player, played for UCD first, played for Leinster, etc. But on this occasion was the person who guided the dental yet again. Okay, so changing tone a little bit, we heard a little bit about the GAA already, and the GAA correctly should be influencing sport throughout all sports, not only within their own area. Of course, there was the ban, and Michael made some reference to this, and players having to play under a disguised name, etc., etc. So the GAA had an influence, an interesting influence on the Hospitals Cup competition, and the influence was this player, David Hickey. David Hickey was a GAA all-star. I summarise his career very briefly here. He was a Gaelic football player. He got onto the Dublin senior team at a very young age, 17. Went on to play 6 All-Ireland finals and won 3 of them, and was made an all-star on 2 occasions. And when he was in UCD, because that's where he studied medicine, he turned his hand to rugby. And I'm told that after a mere 6 weeks of playing with the UCD team, he was selected to play on the colours team. And obviously, as a student in Vincent's Hospital, his rugby talent was not going to be overlooked, and he became a key member then of a winning Vincent side, who won in 72, 74, and 75. There were a lot of other prominent UCD players at this time, including Steve Hall, Mick Turner, Declan Herbert, Tony McDougall, and so on. So even though I pick out players here who've made a big contribution, obviously rugby is a team sport. I think I'll come back to that team a little while later, and it depends on who else is playing with you. So here's a press report of the Vincent side in which David Hickey starred in 1975. Okay, and then I moved from David Hickey as a star player to another star player, and his name has already been mentioned by Michael, because his father played with the Mater side, Brendan Oakley, and the player I'm talking about is Dara Oakley, who I remember, but don't remember clearly enough, because when I speak to people about the talent that Dara Oakley had, it's really impressive. So Dara was now studying dentistry. He was the current UCD out-half. He also played out-half for Leinster. And in this game in 1978, Dara was the sole scorer, 4 penalties and a drop goal with his left boot. I learned just a few days ago that he actually was right-footed footballer, but he scored these with his left boot, and that's pretty impressive. And here's a photograph of that. Here's a photograph of 2 players. Jerry Kearns, who's here, I saw him, spotted him here, diving for the line, and Paul O'Connell attempting to tackle him. And here's an interesting feature. The referee, people recognize him? Dick Beamish, yeah. So another international rugby referee that I've already mentioned. And here is that winning dental team. And it's sited in Trinity. I can see the Moyne Institute there in the back. Here is Dara. Various other highly skilled players in this team. And they went on to win the competition then again 2 years later in 1980. Okay, so I mentioned about amalgamations, and the first event that happened was in terms of Richmond and Jervis Street, is that the team amalgamated. The actual 2 hospitals remained on 2 different sites, and they were defeated finalists 3 years in a row, and that often is the stimulus to allow you to try and do something about it. So they were defeated finalists in these years. So they became truly a force to be reckoned with. And they did achieve victory in 1976. And then again, twice again in the late 70s. So this is clearly an amalgamation that worked. And as I was preparing this, and we've often talked about it, why did this work? Well, part of it is because it goes back to RCSI, because RCSI had their own rugby club, and I presume a lot of these players played for that. So this was almost the equivalent of a team camp, not quite Carlton House, but certainly it would help a team's performance with consistent availability of players. And here are some of the players that starred in those amalgamated Jervis Street Richmond side. Okay, and then Richmond, now they had moved to the Beaumont Hospital. In fact, it was a few years later, but they became essentially an all-conquering side, winning 5 years in a row. And I list here again some of the players. Bill Toomey, who's here, and various other, Conor O'Brien is here, Jim McShane is here, Brian O'Connell. This was a side with real talent who played year after year, and hence this allowed them to win as frequently as they did. I shouldn't leave out Paddy Gavin and David Fennelly, because they were also star players in the back line. And here is that side when they had won their 5th Hospitals Cup in a row. When we look at photographs, it's always interesting to see, is it the Hospitals Cup? Yes, you can see it is the Hospitals Cup. And there are various well-known players here. The captain of this team was David Fennelly, and various other players which I won't pause to point out to you. So, having won the competition now, 5 years in a row, could they do the 6th? And Dublin are contemplating this at the moment. Could they win the GAA final 6 years in a row? And maybe this was one too many. And it turned out, yes, that was the case, because there was victory for the Trinity side. I referred to this already, the Federated or the Feds. And a few quotations, a splendidly hard-fought final with a very narrow victory, and various other positive comments, etc. And some key players who contributed to that victory for the Feds. So the RCSI, which is now Beaumont, because in 1987, I think, Beaumont was established, and they continue to dominate the competition. And Niall Hogan, who I've already mentioned, international scrum half, played on many of these sides and was awarded man of the match in 1989. The person who introduced me was Neil Swan, and Neil Swan was the captain of the 1990 side for Beaumont. Okay, around this time, I think in truth, it was felt that Beaumont were really winning too often, and we needed to rejig the organisation of the team. But also because, going back to Jim Clinch's comments about how loose the competition could become, so it was felt that we needed a tighter organisation. And so several key people instigated this, including Malachy Coughlin, who's here in the audience, Michael Butler, and Paddy Swan. Unfortunately, Paddy died some years later. But just to go back to the organisation, so one of the stipulations was all matches had to be played in November, December, and then the final took place just on the final Friday before Christmas. And that sort of, if you like, tightened the whole structure of the competition. So here are some of the individuals involved. Michael Butler, this is the first speaker, you'll remember, and this is Malachy Coughlin. And then I wanted to show a photograph of Paddy Swan, because I'm told that Paddy Swan really was one of the key people that gelled the organisation of the Hospitals Cup together at that time. So here's a photograph of Paddy with the winning side from 1987, and Neil Swan, who is currently the Secretary Treasurer of the competition. Okay, and one of the benefits that came from all of this was sponsorship. And as Neil mentioned at the beginning, it's hard to run this competition and organise it without some level of funding. And at this time, Upjohn, a pharmaceutical company, provided sponsorship. They were later merged with Bristol Myers Squibb, and then Bristol Myers Squibb for several years helped to fund the competition. And two of the key people in this Bristol Myers Squibb were Dennis Murphy and Richard Stakelin. And they organised pre-final publicity, pre-match receptions, match programmes, and also helped to restore the plinth. We heard that the cup was sometimes not looked after as carefully as it should be. And so the whole approach of keeping match programmes has continued, and this is in tribute to Neil Swan, who makes sure that a very professional programme is produced for every final. And you can see an assembly of some of the recent finals there. Okay, so another issue that was looked into was player eligibility. I suppose we always knew there was a bit of hokey pokey that went on, and sometimes people, in fact, an Ireland coach who I won't name told me he played for Baggot Street Hospital. He was no more remotely anything to do with medicine, but this is, as I say, the hokey pokey that sometimes happened. But so initially, in the old days, as people used to say, the team had to be, to be a member of the team, you had to be a medical student. You couldn't be a pre-medical student, you had to be a medical student or an intern, and that was the way it was controlled, and no one else was allowed. But over the years then, there was a more relaxed attitude taken, and eventually in 1990, medical graduates were allowed, and then subs were allowed, etc. And you'll see the structure of the competition a little later when I get to talk about that. So, of course, I'm going to brag about the Feds. So in 1990, and this was a very famous, infamous even game, so I'll dwell on it a little bit. So in 1991, and don't remember, Beaumont were winning this competition year after year. It was becoming... But the Feds did it again, so they defeated Beaumont again. And it was described as a pulsating, tension-packed game. And the reason why it's infamous is because there was a lot of injury time. And I think I read there was 7 minutes of injury time, and at 7 minutes of injury time, Michael McDonough knifed his way through the opposition defence to score. People were unhappy with the amount of additional injury. And a particular Beaumont supporter, this is hearsay, I don't have firm evidence, that he sent the referee a watch as a Christmas present afterwards. Okay, after this then, Vincent's had a period of domination. You can see the years there, and they had many of these outstanding players. And so when I go through the information, I can see names bouncing off the press reports, including the players that I've listed there. And here is a photograph of one of those winning Vincent sides. I see some further photographs which I wasn't aware of. And it shows that winning side in 1993. So being a team sport, and I mentioned this a little while ago, obviously the things that really matter, and maybe we could send advice to Can, because a lot of people have a lot of strong opinions about what's going on there, but things that really matter are the mentor, the coach, the funds, the players, and the belief. The players have to have belief. And this allows me to introduce a mentor in... And I mentioned to you that we had a significant GAA influence over the years. And this was a very welcome GAA influence. And I'm talking about Jerry McEntee. So as I'll say here, enter the mentor, or enter Jerry McEntee. Now Jerry had a very well-established career in GAA football, played on for many years on Meath All-Ireland teams, winning on 2 occasions, 87 and 88. And so this is a quotation that Jerry is recorded, not audibly, but recorded, I am told, that after the Mater had been defeated on 2 successive occasions, this was too much. And Jerry was quoted as saying, I don't know a lot about rugby, but I do know a lot about winning. And so Jerry got involved, and the Mater duly won the following year. And here is a side. They won 2 years later again. And then, as I think you'll see, they started to win, and it became like Beaumont all over again. But that's the way the competition can run. Now, in the meantime, a lot of people now are fed up and hear the word Brexit all the time. But back, whatever it is, 19 years ago, the word that people talked about all the time was the millennium, and how our watches were going to stop and our laptops would be useless, etc. It was non-stop reference to the millennium. And the reason I put this in is that despite the millennium, Mater had no fears, no millennium fears, and they won the competition. I think it was 6 years in a row in the first years of the millennium. And one of the reasons I mentioned about organisation, so one of the reasons was I'd call it the Jerry McEntee factor, and also the introduction. So rugby was becoming a bit more structured now, and the whole idea of having a coach. And so Nicky Barry, who was well known, I don't think he ever got an international cap, but he did? Good. Okay, so Nicky Barry, who's a well-known international rugby player, we like to, whatever honour we've been given, we like to hold on to it for sure. So Nicky Barry started to help to coach the Mater side, and I'm sure that had a very big influence on the Mater's success. But there were various other people who were coaches. I was thinking on my way in here that, for example, Gabriel Fulcher was another Mater coach who played a role, and I'm sure all the different sides had very important coaching support to allow them achieve what they wished to in the competition. Okay, so I've listed here some of the Mater players. Some of them were very well established, including Mike Moyna, Colin Keane, both captains of UCD, and a whole range of other players, including this man, the Romanian Mihai Virano, who played rugby for Romania. Thank you. Okay. Now, a name I left out on that list because I think this was a remarkable contribution to the competition was John Connealy. I don't see John here, so we can say anything. Is he here? He's there at the back. Thank you, John, for coming. So, John Connealy, I think, probably had more a GAA type background. He was from Limerick, and some of his achievements, I think, are worth noting here. So I've said here he had a kicking triumph. So he played both full-back and out-half for Mater and Beaumont. And this was one of the big advances now that instead of just playing with a single hospital, when you qualified, you could move around to different hospitals. And this improved the standard and also the interest of the team. So John basically scored 2 last-minute occasions that led to victory for the side. So in 2002, a last-minute conversion from the touchline allowed the Mater team to defeat the Feds by 1 point. The hurt still lives on. In fact, and he got revenge perhaps because John also kicked a last-minute penalty goal. Note the touchline each time for Beaumont, allowing Beaumont to defeat the Mater. And if you like, John collected 6 medals during all of this. In a way, this sort of reflects the vibrancy of the competition when an achievement like that is made. Okay, so moving on as quickly as I can. So the competition did move on in the new millennium. So we changed the format of the competition to a round-robin format. That happened in 2004. And now all the teams play 4 games. Bonus points are awarded for tries, etc. And a squad of 23 players. So all of them have boots as well. So it's quite different from the 1950s. And it gives game time for everyone participating. And even though we don't have well-known international players, I think the standard is probably higher now than it ever was. And so many of these are players who played high-level schools rugby, did not want to get involved maybe in the club scene or certainly in the professional scene, and are now turning out for the hospital team. There's coaching involvement, and it was already mentioned that the vet college have rejoined the competition. And one person who played a critical role in this was Michael Farrell, who was the previous speaker. And you needed a certain toughness in a way sometimes to make all of this work. And Michael had that. We supported him, of course, from a distance. Okay, so some of the challenges then that have landed on our lap. Our sponsorship was gone because of new regulations for pharma companies, and this has had significant financial implications. I wanted to mention some other mentors. I mentioned Jerry McEntee, but Colin O'Brien now is a constant. He attends not only all the Mater games, he comes to the other games as well. He's become a scout for the Mater sides, and with considerable success. And Michael Keane has, in a quieter way, carried out the same role for Vincent's. So Vincent's have notched up a lot of wins in recent years between 2009 and 2014, and some of their key players are listed here. Here's a winning Mater side in 2016 and a winning Bowman side in 2017. And so this is all about the cup, but in fact, if there was a question and we had time, we could talk about, because Jim Clinch was asking, if someone plays sport, are they a better doctor? I have no idea. But anyhow, the cup is the thing, and one of the things I think it does, it allows the hospitals to interact with one another, and there's a certain camaraderie related to that. So the cup's the thing. You can see the cup in all the story here in this photograph. And so we hope, and I hope that no one is too disappointed by this, we hope to publish and produce a book. It'll be called The Hospital Pass. Here are some of the inside pages. You've heard a lot about the likely content of this volume, and we believe that this history is really worthy of recording in a permanent manner. It says publication date. I wondered whether I would remove the publication date, but anyway, I left it there. So finally, I just want to thank several people. I want to thank Harriet, Keeper of Collections, and for all the wonderful help that Harriet has given to us, in every respect, but in particular the memorabilia, which is assembled in the front room. And also to the presidents of the College of Physicians, Mary Horgan and Ken Neely, and clearly, obviously, the players. And finally, but certainly not last, is to thank Centric Health, because they are sponsoring the reception. And I hope everyone will have time to attend the reception. Thank you very much.